It's Wednesday in America, and this is the Wednesday in America podcast, hosted by Tom Sims, and I'm here today with my guest, writer and commentator, Alfredo Martin Bravo de Rueda. Today we are having a conversation about what it means to live in post-election America. When we first started talking, Alfredo, we knew that the election was going to go one way or the other, and either way, we were going to have to be a part of a movement, or at least facilitating some conversation that would become a national conversation between people on the right and people on the left and people in the middle about how to navigate through these waters in a divided America. Is that a fair assessment?
Is that most of the damage was self-inflicted. Take into account that from late July to early August, she skyrocketed. She rose spectacularly. Had the elections been in August, she would have beat Trump. But what was the trick that helped her rise so spectacularly? It was her economic message. Now, that brings me to the issue that I want to...
Let me just reiterate. It was her economic message.
It was her economic message, because that's basically what she did. Before she started rallying all around with Biden and Cheney, who are the two of them representatives of very unpopular status quos. But this brings me the fact that she rose that way gives me some hope, but not too much, but some hope, because it means that the public is still receptive to that kind of message.
The public is receptive to an economic message of possibilities, fresh ideas.
Yes, otherwise she would not have risen. But what worries me are when I make parallels with, for instance, the cases of East Germany and the rise of the AFD, or Orban's Hungary, where the economic dissatisfaction can calcify into cultural attitudes, and those are much more difficult to reverse. So that means that we have an opportunity. People is still receptive, but we're in a transition that could end up very badly. So that means we don't have all the time of the world. And that brings us, what can we offer them in terms of an economic, not just economic message, but economic a message that is different. If you ask people what they know about the New Deal, they know nothing, because Democrats have failed miserably, liberals have failed miserably. I mean, liberals with name recognition have failed miserably to sell an adaptation of the lessons of the New Deal. Let me give you just one example. During the clog of the supply chain, Biden kept issuing very timid, tiny measures that had no effect. For instance, extending the hours of operation of Los Angeles port 24/7, while the rest of the supply chain kept running at the all hours. So it had no effect. Meanwhile, you had reports that the reports that the ports were clogged by empty containers, and containers that had all orders that were not picked up by their owners. Imagine if we had applied the lesson from the Civilian Conservation Corps, where the logistics was provided by the Army. In this case, it should have been, let me finish. if I may, in this case, the logistic support could have been provided by the Army Corps of Engineer and the Navy. So you could have get drivers and facilities to take all those containers out of the way. That would have solved everything? No. The chips issue would not have been solved, but easily that could have taken 2 points from inflation, and by the time of the election, we would have been telling another completely different story. So I'm just giving you one example of the lessons of the New Deal we have forgotten, and I could, if you let me, before you come with the next question, we
No, it's
also.
not another question. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with you.
Uh-huh,
So hold your thought there so you can finish it. We might have learned from the New Deal to employ federal resources to keep the supply chain flowing. For instance, during FDR's administration, he employed the military for that purpose. And that enabled the supply chain to remain open at every point where it might have been clogged up, as
and
in
and that's just one
the
example
ports.
that is very
That is one
relevant.
example. I just want to make sure everybody
Mhm.
heard that. Now, please continue with that thought.
Okay. You can adapt examples about the role of government direct investment from the Tennessee Valley Authority that rescue much a lot of land and challenge the pricing power of corporations that were in the energy sector. And that's a valuable lessons because the Inflation Reduction Act, as good as it is just full of grants. And meanwhile, we have a climate crisis that, because of what is happening in China and Russia, will have to be addressed not with less consumption, but with more sequestration, more better technology to process the effects. Uh, so there are lessons, the same lesson. So the government not giving grants and waiting for the corporations to do the right thing, but government taking the lead, as Kennedy during the space race. And you could see, for people that are much better informed than me, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, you could see all the benefits for the civil sector and the military sector that came out of that endeavor. And now, if another lesson of history we have
Well,
forgotten
before
is
you
the
get on to
example.
another lesson of
Uh-huh,
history, and I want you to do that, I just want
mhm,
to reiterate
mhm.
that one example of stimulating the economy and creating business opportunity in your citation would be the early days of NASA. And then also, I'm aware, personally aware, in some of my coaching and mentoring in the business world, NASA is still creating economic opportunities for startup businesses and innovative ideas. So that is one good example of history. Now, please continue.
Yeah, but more can be done because
Oh, yeah.
sometimes resources get wasted because, for instance, in the health industry, if you are in the health industry, you prefer to treat than curing because treating gives you a permanent client. Curing stops the demand for what you are saying, for what you're selling. But
That's
another
a good
value.
illustration, by the way. I do actually see that as an unspoken, maybe even unthought of motivation that's sort of behind a lot of things. I doubt that in a boardroom they're going to actually say that for the minutes. But that also sounds a little bit like what RFK would say, RFK
Mhm.
Jr. But
Well, probably, but
so, I mean,
the
it's
the
not
problem.
just a clear-cut left-right
Mhm.
tug of war.
the problem with RFK Jr. is that he's part of a government that is not going to be very sympathetic for many of his proposals. So is that he may have many beautiful ideas. He has some weird ideas, but many of his beautiful ideas may have to be diluted in compromise or completely dying in obscurity. So the context is also important. But
Yes.
let me mention another important, very, very, very important history lesson of history that we have forgotten. And we cannot expect the voters to connect the dots if we are not giving them ideas. If we are not helping them to connect. Is the example of Martin Luther King and Kennedy. In the case of Martin Luther King, in terms of racial justice and economic inequality, he founded, shortly before he died, the Poor People Campaign. And that was a message aimed at the poor, seeking more justice in the economy. Compare that to some organizations that have monopolized the activism about minorities, that claim that the priority should be to call Latinx or blackface or the statue or the name of the base, and a lot of ridiculous proposals that have nothing to do with the priorities of black people and Latino people. And how you can see that? Pew Research have shortly before the election made service where you can see what the priorities of black and Latino people are, and you can see from NIH and others papers that show the dramatically high rate of suicides among transgender people. And I can't believe that they are committing suicide because they are not called by they are not asked their pronouns, or because you don't let transgender women beat women in women's sports. That would be a trivialization of their tragedy, and trivialization is the message that we want to prevent. These people are, or in the case of immigration, they have made a mess at the border. If you see the Gallup polls, you see that the attitudes toward immigration were rising when Biden came to power. And from then has been a sustained decline. That has helped people rationalize Trump's cruelty. So that has been, we have to reframe those issues in terms of what these people, these minorities need, not in terms of the whims of these heirs of Stokely Carmichael. And that's where in 1968, Travis Smiley, or Travis Smiley, has a beautiful book
Yes. Yes.
about the conflict between Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael, the difference between their messages. And what we people don't know is that Stokely Carmichael has revived behind these organizations, and we need to counter that with reviving Martin Luther King.
So Martin Luther King, when you began this last round,
Mhm.
toward the end of his life, very short life, unfortunately, tragically short life, initiated the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign was a very interracial outreach toward those who were economically in a state of depression and oppression, and those who were not benefiting from the American dream, economic dream. And even though it grew out of the racial inequality and the fact that Black people were already being marginalized and had a disproportionate amount of poverty. I remember the Poor People's Campaign, and I remember Dr. King reaching out across racial lines. I remember Senator Robert Kennedy also visiting Appalachia and the mining towns, and his compassion for the poor, regardless of ethnicity. And also in Dr. King's last stand, his last visit in Memphis, it was, even though most of the garbage collection workers were Black, it was economic justice and labor justice. And then, of course, he had not long before that felt that he needed to extend his influence to speaking out against the Vietnam War. And now I'm hearing you say that we're living in a time when across identity, people call it identity politics sometimes. And of course, from my perspective, there's a validity to revisiting those things historically and setting records straight. But I hear you saying that there are issues that across identities, transgender people are dealing with some of the same issues as Black people, as Latino people, as Caucasian people who are caught up in this whirlwind of economic, sometimes injustice, often inequality, certainly um, difficulty. And that if we could address common concerns, then we could find common ground. Is that a fair application?
Basically, yes, but we also have to take into account it's like the idea of the melting pot. You have a melting pot, but you have some small islands of identity around it. In this case, there are, for instance, we don't know enough about the reasons behind transgender suicide. That could require some specific aid for this community, like for instance, more mental counseling. So, in the case of the Hispanics, the top topic is not immigration, but immigration is also part, and we have to address immigration. So in the Black community, you could see probably the penal system. It's not one of the two or three top issues, but we should also address. But in the end, is the core. The core, yeah, I agree, it's the same.
So, I mean, certainly all of those things have a historical and sociological thread that connects them. But I know that if I went to the doctor yesterday
Mhm.
and I revisited a symptom. Like a lot of people my age, I suffer from neuropathy. And he said, well, we can spend all the time running down the causes of your neuropathy. But what we know about peripheral neuropathy is that it can't be reversed. And therefore, what is the most effective treatment for you at this time, no matter what caused it? And so that was one metaphor that came to my mind. The other was you were talking about the melting pot. And of course, I've I've used melting pots in food and I blended fruits, for a good fruit juice. But in my stews, I like to have the flavors get to know each other and form some common ground. But I do like to taste the difference between a potato and a carrot. And in my salads, I definitely want them all together, but I want to know when I bite into a radish or when I'm biting
Well,
into a lettuce. And I want everything to maintain its character while it's getting along.
no, yeah, you have a melting pot, a common core, but you also have people speaking Yiddish in kosher markets. You have in Los Angeles bodegas where people speak Spanish. You
Yeah.
have Italian restaurants where they speak Italian. So that there are elements of identity that could be conserved on the at the fringe on the border.
Well, we
But
miss out a lot when we don't celebrate those, and each brings something to the table, not just their problems. Everybody's got unique
mhm.
problems because of where they came from. A
but
Ukrainian, I have a very large community of Ukrainian friends here, and it's interesting that in my part of the country, in the church world, they all attend the Russian churches. So Russian is their commonality. And yet, most of the people that are attending the Russian congregations here, I've found are Ukrainian. And so they have sometimes a little tension with their Russian brothers and sisters, but they also have a deep concern about what's going on over there. Just like, all expatriates and people of diaspora are concerned with their people in their countries of origin. So
yeah,
there's certainly going to be tensions when we come to the table as we look for common solutions.
that has been also true in the 20th century when Italian Poles and Jews had their own identity and tried to advocate for their countries of birth. What matters is that as long as we remember that those are secondary issues and that the core is the common needs, that's okay
Well,
because
I think that one of the things certainly we're using FDR as an example. And of
Mhm,
course, FDR came in the Depression era. I
mhm.
was reading the other day that we had an anniversary of Herbert Hoover, his predecessor, introducing a works program that never got off the ground. And it wasn't so much that works was not a Democratic or Republican issue, is that FDR was able to pull it off.
If
And
you
I
let
think you're
me
trying to
share,
show me a book,
yeah.
but it's fading.
Well, anyway, I will send you the image later. This is the best book about the times of the New Deal, and
Yeah.
what you say is true. The problem with Hoover is that his like Biden's his programs were too tiny, not bold enough, so they made no difference.
No critical mass.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, it was too small to make any difference.
I and he walked a little gingerly through it. But I think that, people when they saw the public works programs that Roosevelt brought,
Mhm.
there were people that even into my lifetime felt that Roosevelt was way too socialist. But it was also true that the people of Oklahoma, of the, that are really conservative people and agricultural people, they came to love and appreciate FDR, if not FDR, his programs because they saw, what worked. And, things like the Tennessee Valley Authority that,
Mhm.
eventually grew out of that mindset. But I was
And
thinking
very
that what really rallied people of various ethnic backgrounds and regardless of where their people came from, those who had come from Europe, was um, once World War II, once the United States decided to enter World War II, and there were some very clear prompts that drew the U.S. into World War II, even those that sympathized with Germany, even those who had been reluctant to get involved, there was almost a universal, not seen in World War One. In World War One, they had to repress the opposition, but there was almost a universal coming together against the aggression of Hitler. even
Oh,
before they understood what he was doing through the systematic genocide
one
of the
of the most
Jews and others.
decorated units in World War II was the Japanese unit, even
Well,
though they were always suspected, so they never saw the Pacific combat, but only in Europe. But they were one of the most decorated, the most brave units. Yeah, that's one point is that probably is that in terms of the FDR, the benefits that Democrats are so prone of will call the dole. And you could see that people and FDR could also realize that people prefer tools so they can earn what they needed, not benefits,
tools so they
not
can earn.
so they can earn, so they can earn their living
Oh, yes.
with their work more than benefits, more than handouts, and but because Roosevelt understood that with his works program, Harry, uh, I forgot.
Truman?
With his works programs,
Oh,
uh, no, it's that it just slipped my mind. I have been reading. Yeah, because of that, he could get enough political capital to sell policies like Social Security. If had he
well, and
so,
Social Security, of course, came under great criticism from the right, but
mhm.
nobody wants to give it up now if they receive it. And
But
so it has
even
become essential to,
at
who
the
we are.
moment it was created, it was a tough sell because it implies deductions from paychecks in order to get benefit in the middle of the depression, in order to get benefits in the future. And yet people gladly accepted and embraced Social Security. Why? Because those works programs had allowed people to regain their dignity, not at all. It's the dignity
And they can
that
say,
says,
I earned it. And I think it's absolutely true. You earned it, you
mhm,
contributed to it. And
yeah.
I think everybody wants to earn things. This whole thing about giving a fish or teaching someone to fish, and but then there's another level to that is you got to take the fence down from around the pond.
There are
Somebody
two
who knows
different,
how to fish with a fishing rod who can't get to the water because someone's built a fence there is going to continue to be hungry.
but precisely that the fact that those works programs let people regain their dignity after the months of unemployment. When Roosevelt saw the New Deal, people were glad to receive it. Just a very short example, a very small comparison. In the worst month of the inflation, Biden tried to blame corporations. And it's true, corporations, corporations' pricing power allow them to push the whole cost of inflation to people. And people pay for that inflation with their savings, the savings they got from the American Relief Act. So that they have a reason to be angry. Uh, consider what would happen had Biden used the Army Corps of Engineers to reduce inflation at the port. He could use that take credit for that achievement, and then he could have solved the need to put limits on the corporation's pricing power by increasing the powers of the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. That would have been a way to get another accomplishment and more political capital. Instead, he chose to do tiny child things like Uber.
Well, we're going to have a lot more conversations about this and digging into some of these issues and how we can set a stage for problem solving over the next few years and going forward. And hopefully, we're going to come back to some of these loose ends that we're going to leave hanging today. But
so, could you let me just a minute to finish?
yes,
Because
would you summarize?
yeah, no, not to summarize, but to say why have we been discussing all these reference to the past, because they can allow us to fix the system in a way that is the current politics has not been able to. We cannot, if we wait for the next primaries to rally around another candidate like cheerleaders, we will get disappointment, because either we will get another Kamala Harris, another Joe Biden, weak to the end, and discredit even more the Democratic Party, or we will get the Vance, JD Vance first term. So how can we make politicians accountable? We should start with ideas, and don't be too arrogant, because we have a left side and a right side. On the left side, what I propose is a FDR side, going back to Kennedy, to Roosevelt, to Martin Luther King, to create this side, and seek the collaboration of the rational right. So you have here in the middle a buffet of ideas from which you can people with more renowned names can give visibility according to their preferences. The matter is that in this range of ideas, you will have a more conservative or more liberal-leaning ideas, but that are compatible. So politicians cannot get excuses about they cannot get the votes or anything or things of that sort. So what we need is to create this buffet of ideas before we get back to the old sins that have led us to this loop of disappointment.
I think you're very right about that. And I think that especially about being idea driven and being solution driven and getting well ahead of the primaries and the identification with candidates. I think that the best hope for America is for Americans to set the agenda at the ground level and then let our politicians reflect that. And what better time to begin to do that than right after a national election, when there's there's not even a congressional election for 2 years. So we're going to get back to all of this, my friend, and look forward to more conversations.
Sure.
So